They say the first sign of trouble is a shift in routine. For Emily and me, routine was what kept us grounded. Weekday mornings were predictable chaos, her rushing to get to the hospital where she worked as a nurse, me juggling work calls while packing lunch for our daughter, Lily. Evenings were quieter, filled with homework help, dinner, and Netflix. But over the past few months, Emily's routine had changed. Subtly at first, an extra shift here, a missed dinner there. I didn't think much of it. She was passionate about her work, and I admired that about her. But then came the late nights, the vague explanations, the way she'd disappear into her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. "Everything okay?" I asked one evening as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her messages with a furrowed brow. "Yeah," she said quickly, locking her screen and setting the phone aside. "Just work stuff." Her tone was casual, but her body language wasn't. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and her smile didn't reach her face. Something was off. The feeling that something was off didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. Emily's late nights at work became more frequent, and she seemed distracted even when she was home. Conversations felt forced, like she was trying too hard to be normal, but the warmth we'd shared was missing. One Friday evening, as I set the table for dinner, I decided to test the waters. "You've been working a lot lately," I said casually. "Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway. Just the two of us." Emily paused, her hand hovering over the salad bowl. "That sounds nice," she said, but her tone lacked enthusiasm. "I'll check my schedule." Her nonchalance stung. We hadn't taken a trip together in years, and I'd expected her to be excited at the idea. Instead, she seemed indifferent. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired. Work has been crazy." But her words didn't ease my unease. If anything, they made it worse. The next morning, Emily left early for what she said was a staff meeting at the hospital. I didn't think much of it until I walked into the bedroom to grab my wallet and noticed her tablet on the nightstand. The screen was still on, a text conversation open. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped, but the knot in my stomach urged me to look. The message on the screen read, "Can't wait to see you later. Same place." The sender's name was simply J. My blood ran cold. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Who was J? And why was Emily meeting them? The question gnawed at me all day, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. Emily's phone, which she used to leave lying around, was now always in her pocket or face down on the counter. She left the room to take certain calls and became defensive when I asked about her schedule. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and immediately silenced it, slipping the phone into her lap. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just work," she said without looking up. It was the same answer she always gave, but this time I wasn't buying it. By the weekend, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So, when Emily left the house on Sunday morning, claiming she was running errands, I decided to follow her. My heart raced as I trailed her car through town. She wasn't heading to the grocery store or the hospital. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the edge of town. I parked a safe distance away and watched as she got out of the car and walked inside. A few minutes later, a man joined her. He was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile. They sat by the window, their conversation animated. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. My stomach churned. This wasn't just work. This wasn't innocent. I sat in my car, staring through the cafe window as my wife laughed with this stranger. The way she leaned in, the way he touched her hand, it was undeniable. My chest tightened with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I wanted to storm inside and demand an explanation, but a voice in my head told me to wait. I needed more than just a fleeting moment to truly understand what was going on. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. It felt wrong, invasive, but I couldn't shake the image of her with that man. Her messages with Jay confirmed my fears. They weren't just friends or co-workers. Their exchanges were flirtatious, intimate, and laced with a familiarity that sent a chill down my spine. One message stood out. "I miss you already. Counting down the days until we can get away again." Get away? Again? My heart pounded as I scrolled further, piecing together snippets of their conversations. There were mentions of a weekend trip, late-night rendezvous, and inside jokes that I couldn't begin to understand. The betrayal was suffocating, but what struck me most was the familiarity of Jay's words. Something about his tone, the way he phrased things, it felt eerily familiar. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the man from the cafe. His face was burned into my memory, and something about him felt off. I decided to dig deeper. After some sleuthing online, I found him, Jake Wilson. His social media confirmed it, he was the man I'd seen with Emily. But that wasn't all. As I scrolled through his posts, I came across a photo that made my blood run cold. It was from years ago, a group picture from my college days. And there he was, standing in the back row, a familiar face I hadn't thought about in over a decade. Jake had been one of my classmates, someone I'd been friendly with but never particularly close to. We'd drifted apart after graduation, and I hadn't seen him since. Until now. The realization hit me like a freight train. Emily wasn't just cheating. She was cheating with someone from my past. That evening, I couldn't hold back any longer. As Emily sat at the dining table, scrolling through her phone, I placed my hands flat on the surface and stared at her. "Who's Jake?" I asked, my voice low and steady. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" "Don't play dumb, Emily," I said, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I saw you with him yesterday. I went through your phone. I know everything." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, "Mark, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped. "That you've been sneaking around with someone from my past. That you've been lying to me for months." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. "Why, Emily? Why him?" She hesitated, then whispered, "It wasn't planned. It just happened." Emily confessed that she'd reconnected with Jake months ago when he moved back to town. They'd bumped into each other by chance, started catching up, and one thing led to another. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "But I was lonely, Mark. We've been so distant lately." "Lonely?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think that justifies this?" "No, of course not," she said quickly. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I never wanted to hurt you." But her words felt hollow. The damage was already done, and no apology could undo the betrayal. The confession left me reeling. Emily's tears and apologies barely registered. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. But it wasn't just about her anymore, it was about Jake. The fact that she'd chosen someone from my past, someone who had been part of my life long before she came into the picture, made it all the more unbearable. That night, while Emily slept fitfully on the couch, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't let this go without confronting him. I needed answers. The next morning, I found Jake's address online. It was risky, impulsive, but I didn't care. I drove across town, my anger simmering as I rehearsed what I would say. When I arrived at his house, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself before marching up to the door and knocking loudly. Jake answered, his expression shifting from surprise to unease when he saw me. "Mark," he said, his voice cautious. "This is unexpected." "Unexpected?" I repeated, my voice steady but cold. "You've been sleeping with my wife, and you think this is unexpected?" He stepped back, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. Can we talk inside?" I followed him into the house, my fists clenched at my sides. The cozy living room felt suffocating, the kind of space that should belong to a person with integrity, not someone who had destroyed my marriage. "Why, Jake?" I demanded, cutting to the chase. "Why her? Out of all the people in this town, why did it have to be my wife?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mark, I didn't plan this. I didn't even know she was your wife when we first reconnected." "That doesn't make it better," I snapped. "When you found out, you could have stopped. But you didn't. You kept going." He looked away, guilt written all over his face. "You're right. I was selfish. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I said bitterly. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Jake. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed her, and you betrayed any decency you might have had." As I turned to leave, Jake said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Mark, she wasn't happy." I froze, my anger surging again. "What's that supposed to mean?" "She told me about your marriage," he said cautiously. "How distant things had become. How she felt like you didn't see her anymore." I spun around, my voice like ice. "And you thought that gave you the right to insert yourself into our lives? To exploit her feelings and destroy our family?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I'm not excusing it. I thought you should know." "Save your justifications," I said sharply. "You've done enough damage." When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes puffy and red. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "I went to see him," I said bluntly. Her face fell. "Mark." "I wanted to hear it from him," I said, cutting her off. "I wanted to know why he thought it was okay to destroy everything we built." "What did he say?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" I snapped. "He blamed you. Said you were unhappy. As if that makes it better." Tears streamed down her face. "I never wanted it to get this far, Mark. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I want to fix this." I stared at her, my heart a mess of conflicting emotions. "I don't know if we can fix this, Emily. I don't even know if I want to." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I avoided Emily as much as possible, throwing myself into work and spending extra time with Lily. She was too young to understand what was happening, but she could sense the tension. Her usual bubbly demeanor had dimmed, and every time she asked when we'd have a family movie night again, it felt like a knife to the heart. Emily, to her credit, didn't give up. She scheduled counseling sessions, gave me space when I needed it, and tried to show me she was committed to making things right. But the wounds were fresh, and I couldn't bring myself to trust her. One evening, as Lily slept and the house was eerily quiet, Emily sat across from me at the dining table. "Mark," she said softly, "I know I can't undo what I've done. But I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, tell me what you need." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, and felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily," I said finally. "But for Lily's sake, I'm willing to try." Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise, I won't let you down." Saying I was willing to try was one thing, actually taking steps to rebuild our marriage was another. Emily's betrayal wasn't just a crack in the foundation, it was a complete collapse. But for Lily's sake, and maybe for my own, I needed to see if there was anything left worth saving. Emily had already scheduled our first counseling session. We met with Dr. Carter, a soft-spoken man who radiated calm. He began by asking us why we were there. Emily spoke first, her voice trembling. I betrayed Mark, and I want to fix what I've broken. I love him, and I want to rebuild our family. I couldn't meet her gaze. I don't know if I can forgive her, I said bluntly. But I owe it to Lily to try. Dr. Carter nodded, his expression understanding. Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest things to do, but it starts with honesty. Emily, are you prepared to answer Mark's questions, no matter how difficult they may be? Yes, she said quickly. Anything he needs to know. I hesitated before asking the question that had been eating away at me. Why Jake? Of all people, why him? Emily looked down at her hands. When I ran into him, it was like a window into another life, she said quietly. He reminded me of who I was before everything became so routine. I made a terrible choice, Mark. I let my feelings of unhappiness cloud everything else. Her answer hurt, but at least it was honest. Over the next few weeks, we attended more sessions, each one peeling back another layer of pain and misunderstanding. Emily gave me access to her phone, her schedule, and anything else I needed to feel secure. But trust isn't something you can force, and every time I saw her glance at her phone or leave the house, a part of me still wondered. One night, as we sat in silence after a particularly emotional session, she turned to me. Mark, I know it's not enough, but I'm trying. I'll keep trying for as long as it takes. I know, I said quietly. But it's not just about you trying. It's about me believing. Lily had always been the glue that held us together, but even she wasn't immune to the tension. She started asking questions, why we weren't laughing as much, why we didn't have family movie nights anymore. Mommy and Daddy are just working through some things, I told her one evening as I tucked her in. But we both love you very much. Her big brown eyes searched mine. Promise? I promise, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. One evening, Emily told me she needed to stay late at the hospital. My chest tightened, old fears bubbling to the surface. But instead of accusing her, I simply said, okay. Let me know if you need me to pick you up. Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. I will. That night, I stayed up waiting, half expecting to catch her in another lie. But at 9:30, she called. I'm heading home now, she said. Just wanted you to know. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. For the first time in months, her actions matched her words. Despite the progress Emily and I were making, there was one loose end I couldn't ignore, Jake. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd gotten off too easily. So one afternoon, I drove back to his house. When he answered the door, his face paled. Mark. What are you doing here? I need closure, I said simply. And you're going to give it to me. Jake invited me in, clearly uneasy. We sat in his living room, the tension thick in the air. What do you want to know? He asked. I want to know if you're going to stay away, I said bluntly. Because if you come near my wife or my family again, there won't be a conversation next time. Jake nodded quickly. I understand. I never meant for things to go this far. You didn't mean for things to go this far. I repeated bitterly. You destroyed lives, Jake. And for what? A fling. He looked down, shame written all over his face. I'm sorry, Mark. Truly. You'll never hear from me again. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. Where were you? She asked, her tone cautious. I went to see Jake, I said honestly. Her face fell. Mark. I needed to make sure he understood, I said. That this is over. Completely. Her expression softened, and she nodded. Thank you. That night, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The weeks following my confrontation with Jake were a strange mix of progress and setbacks. Emily and I continued our counseling sessions, but rebuilding trust wasn't just about therapy. It was about the everyday moments, the unspoken gestures and the consistency of her actions. And while there were times when I felt like we were moving forward, the scars of her betrayal were never far from the surface. One of the things Dr. Carter suggested was creating new routines, something fresh to replace the ones that had been tainted by lies and betrayal. Emily took the idea to heart. Let's start doing Sunday brunch as a family, she suggested one evening. We can cook together, make it a tradition. I hesitated but eventually agreed. That first Sunday, we made pancakes with Lily. The kitchen was filled with laughter and the smell of maple syrup, and for a moment, it felt like we were a normal family again. After brunch, as we cleaned up, Emily turned to me and said softly, "Thank you for giving this a chance." I nodded, not ready to say more, but her gratitude felt genuine. Despite the small steps forward, there were still moments that pulled me back. One afternoon, Emily received a text while we were sitting on the couch. She glanced at her phone and smiled slightly before locking the screen. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's just a message from Kelly," she said, referring to a coworker I'd met a few times. "She's asking if I can cover her shift next week." My chest tightened, the old paranoia flaring up. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" Emily hesitated, then set her phone on the table between us. "Mark, I understand why you're asking. And I don't blame you. But I need you to trust me when I say it's nothing." Her calm response disarmed me, and I nodded reluctantly. "I'm trying, Emily. It's just hard." "I know," she said gently. "And I'll keep giving you reasons to believe me." One evening, as we sat together after putting Lily to bed, Emily handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Mark. I know I've said I'm sorry 100 times, but I need you to understand just how much I mean it. You didn't deserve what I did to you, and there's nothing I can do to erase the pain I've caused. But I want you to know that every day, I'm working to be better, for you, for Lily, for us. You're my home, and I'll never stop trying to prove that I'm worthy of this second chance." The sincerity in her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt a crack in the armor I'd built around my heart. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This means a lot." One weekend, Emily suggested visiting her parents, something we hadn't done since the affair came to light. "It might help to get away for a bit," she said. "And they've been asking about us." The idea made me uneasy, but I agreed. When we arrived, her parents welcomed us with open arms, unaware of the storm we were still navigating. Watching Emily interact with them, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, kind, compassionate, and full of life. That night, as we sat on the porch of their house, Emily reached for my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I think it was good for us," I admitted. "And for Lily." She smiled, and for a brief moment, I felt a fragile sense of peace. When we returned home, we started talking about the future. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" Emily asked one evening. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," I said honestly. "But maybe that's not the goal. Maybe we're supposed to build something new." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I'd like that." It wasn't a promise of perfection, but it was a commitment to keep trying. And for now, that was enough. Building something new was easier said than done. Emily and I were finding a rhythm, but trust is a fragile thing. It felt like walking a tightrope, one misstep away from falling back into the darkness we'd worked so hard to climb out of. Still, we kept moving forward. One evening, Emily told me she had a work event to attend. "It's a fundraiser for the hospital," she explained. "I'll only be gone a few hours." My stomach tightened. The thought of her being out late, dressed up, surrounded by colleagues, some of whom I didn't know, brought back old fears. "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked, trying to mask the suspicion in my voice. She hesitated, then nodded. "If that would make you feel better, I'd love for you to come." Her response surprised me. I had expected defensiveness or irritation, but instead, she seemed open. So, we went together. At the event, Emily introduced me to her co-workers, and I saw her in a new light. She was confident, professional, and respected. Watching her work the room, I felt a flicker of pride. For the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, untainted by the shadows of betrayal. When we left that night, she squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means a lot." "Thank you for letting me," I replied. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Around this time, Sarah, my best friend from college, reached out. We hadn't spoken in months, largely because I'd pulled away from everyone during the turmoil. "Mark," she said when we met for coffee. "You've been through so much, and I just wanted to check in." Her concern was genuine, and it felt good to talk to someone outside the bubble of my marriage. As I shared what had happened, Sarah listened without judgment, offering words of support that I hadn't realized I needed. "Do you still love her?" she asked gently. "I think so," I admitted. "But it's hard. Every time I look at her, I see what she did." "Then don't look at what she did," Sarah said. "Look at what she's doing now. If she's trying, really trying, then maybe it's worth it." Her words stuck with me. Emily was trying, and maybe it was time for me to do the same. Inspired by Sarah's advice, I began making more of an effort to reconnect with Emily. We started having regular date nights again, something we hadn't done in years. At first, it felt forced, but over time, the awkwardness faded. One night, after a particularly fun evening bowling with Lily, Emily and I sat on the porch, laughing about our terrible scores. "I missed this," she said, her voice soft. "Us." "Me too," I admitted. "I think we're getting there." Her smile was radiant, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine spark of hope. Just as things seemed to be improving, a new challenge arose. One evening, as I scrolled through social media, I came across a post from Jake. It wasn't anything incriminating, but seeing his face brought back all the pain and anger I'd worked so hard to suppress. When Emily came into the room, she noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," I said quickly, but she wasn't convinced. "Mark," she said gently, sitting beside me. "You can tell me." I hesitated, then showed her the post. Her face fell, and she reached for my hand. "I know it's hard," she said. "But I promise, he's not part of my life anymore." Her reassurance helped, but it also reminded me how fragile our progress was. The past had a way of creeping back in, threatening to undo everything we'd built. A few days later, Emily surprised me with tickets to a concert by a band we'd loved in college. "I thought it might be nice to relive some good memories," she said, her eyes hopeful. The concert was incredible, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself fully enjoy the moment. As we danced and sang along, I realized that while the past couldn't be erased, it didn't have to define our future. That night, as we walked back to the car, Emily slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you for coming," she said. "For giving us a chance." I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. "Thank you for fighting for us," I said. Rebuilding our marriage had been a marathon, not a sprint. Every step forward felt hard-earned, but the scars of the past lingered, like shadows that refused to fade completely. Still, I wanted to believe we were on the right path. But belief isn't always enough, and life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. It happened on a crisp Saturday morning. Emily and I had taken Lily to a local farmer's market, one of the new traditions we'd started. As we browsed the stalls, Lily tugged on Emily's hand, leading her toward a stand selling handmade jewelry. I lagged behind, stopping to buy a bag of apples. That's when I saw him. Jake. He was standing a few stalls away, his attention focused on a woman beside him. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm. My stomach churned. He hadn't seen me, but I couldn't look away. Seeing him again, so casual and unaffected, reignited every ounce of anger I'd fought to suppress. Mark. Emily's voice jolted me back to the present. She was standing beside me, holding Lily's hand. Her eyes followed my gaze, landing on Jake. Her face paled. I didn't say anything as we walked back to the car, but Emily's tension was palpable. Once Lily was buckled in, I turned to her. Did you know he'd be here? No, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Mark, I swear, I didn't. Her panic seemed genuine, but the sight of Jake had unearthed every doubt I'd worked so hard to bury. Seeing him, I began, my voice tight. It just brings it all back. I know, she said softly, reaching for my hand. But he's not part of my life anymore. You are. We are. Please don't let this ruin what we've been rebuilding. Her words stayed with me as we drove home. I wanted to believe her, but the emotional weight of the encounter hung heavy over the rest of the day. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily and I sat on the porch in silence. The air between us felt charged, like an unspoken argument waiting to erupt. I hate that he still has this power over us, I said finally. He doesn't, Emily said firmly. Mark, I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But I've spent every day since trying to prove that I'm here for you. For us. Jake doesn't matter anymore. Her voice cracked on the last words, and for the first time, I saw not just remorse but desperation. She didn't just want forgiveness, she needed it. The next day, I made a decision. I couldn't keep holding on to the anger and pain if I truly wanted to move forward. It wasn't about letting Jake off the hook or erasing what had happened. It was about choosing to focus on what mattered, the life Emily and I were trying to rebuild. That evening, I told her as much. I'm tired of letting the past control me, I said. I'm not saying I'm over it, but I'm ready to stop letting it define us. Tears streamed down her face, and she reached for my hand. Thank you, she whispered. I promise, Mark, I'll keep proving that you made the right choice. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. The tension that had lingered between us began to ease, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. We planned a weekend trip with Lily, something we hadn't done in years. Hiking through the woods and roasting marshmallows by the fire reminded me of what I'd been fighting for, not just a marriage, but a family. On the final night of the trip, as we sat by the campfire, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. Do you think we'll be okay? She asked. I think we're getting there, I said. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Rebuilding trust is a lifelong process, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But as Emily and I sat together, watching the flames flicker and crackle, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, hope. We weren't the same people we'd been before the betrayal, and our marriage wasn't the same either. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this new version of us, scarred, imperfect, but deeply committed, was stronger in ways we couldn't have imagined. As the fire died down and the stars filled the sky, I took Emily's hand in mine. Whatever came next, we would face it together.